Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin with the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It's a lot to get to here, so I want to hit a lot of topics. The first topic I want to hit is this coronavirus. Joe Biden is fond of blaming the President of the United States for every single death that's resulted from the coronavirus. They say the Trump administration was slow out of the gate. They say they have a plan. I have no idea what their plan is, to be perfectly honest with you. How do you respond to this?
Well, from the very early days of the coronavirus pandemic in this country, President Trump put the health of America first. I was there, Mark, in the Oval Office. When our scientists came in January, when there were 5 coronavirus cases in the United States, all of which had come back from China. And they said that we needed to suspend all travel from the second largest economy in the world. And President Trump, behind the resolute desk, made the decision on the spot to suspend all travel from China. And I can tell you, as the head of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that decision alone saved countless American lives because it bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And it's important the American people understand that Joe Biden criticized the President's decision in January. He said it was xenophobic. He said it was hysterical. In fact, he wrote a week earlier that closing down travel from China or any other country would actually make things worse. But the truth is, it bought us time, Mark, to reinvent testing. We've now done 120 million tests around the country, just distributed 100 million tests to schools so we can open up our schools again and keep kids there safely. We saw to the development, the production, and the distribution of literally billions of supplies. No American who ever required a ventilator was ever denied a ventilator. No American who required an ICU bed was ever denied an ICU bed. And early in the month of February, the moment that we got the genetic coding for the coronavirus, we began work on a vaccine. And in 6 weeks, we were in phase 1 clinical trials. And as we sit here today, the President and I are confident that with the extraordinary research scientists and companies that we have in this country under Operation Warp Speed, that we're going to have the first coronavirus vaccine before the end of this year. And we're already going to have tens of millions of doses to be able to distribute. So Joe Biden got it wrong at the beginning. And the truth is that should come as no surprise, because when you look back when Joe Biden was vice president, we had the swine flu impact this country in 2009. And they refused to close off any travel from Mexico at the time. In fact, in a very real sense, they had an utterly failed response. I mean, by the fall of 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, the swine flu, also known as H1N1, had infected 60 million Americans. And if it had had the same fatality rate as the coronavirus does, we would have lost more than 2 million American lives. Joe Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klein, actually was candid last fall when he said that it was only luck, that it wasn't one of as he said, one of the worst mass casualty events in American history. He said that the Obama-Biden administration's response to H1N1 was, he said, we got everything wrong. But from very early on, President Trump took decisive action to put the health of America first. And all along the way, he listened to the scientists. And even in that momentous decision that he made in the middle of March to ask American businesses and American families to make incredible sacrifices during that 45 days to slow the spread, I couldn't be more proud of this president's leadership. And I believe with all my heart that while we grieve the loss of more than 200,000 Americans, and any of the families that are looking in tonight should know there's never a day gone by that their families haven't been in our hearts and in our prayers, I'm absolutely convinced that because of the President's leadership, because of our partnership with state health officials, because of doctors and nurses, and because of the cooperation of the American people, that we literally saved hundreds of thousands of American lives, and we are just a matter of weeks away from having a coronavirus vaccine that will be the beginning of us putting this pandemic in the past once and for all.
So it sounds like you had to do multiple things at the same time. Number one, you had to figure out what this virus is.
Right.
Number two, you had to make sure that the states that were short on supplies had supplies. The states that were short on hospital beds had hospital beds. That the states that were short on ventilators had ventilators. On top of that, you had to begin the process immediately to say of trying to figure out how to fix this with a vaccine and various therapeutics. So all this was taking place at once. Sounds like a massive task to bring in these disparate entities in the federal government, disparate entities in the pharmaceutical world and in the lab world to build up tests. So my question is this. You had to start from scratch. Did you have anything available to you when this pandemic hit from the prior administration?
The truth is, the Strategic National Stockpile was emptied out at the end of H1N1, the swine flu in 2009. And in the next 7 years, they never replenished it. When the coronavirus began to strike in our country, we had 15,000 ventilators in the Strategic National Stockpile. It was one of the reasons why, here was the advantage of having a businessman become President of the United States. When he tapped me to lead the task force, Mark, he made it clear to me from the outset, and not only did he want a whole-of-government approach at every level, a seamless partnership with states, but the President made it clear that we wanted a whole-of-America approach, and we began to immediately partner, not just with research companies developing a vaccine and developing medicine, but we partnered with manufacturing firms around the country, with GE Healthcare, with General Motors, and with Ford. They literally repurposed manufacturing lines to build ventilators around America. And as we sit here today, and as we see cases beginning to rise in some heartland states, we have 150,000 ventilators in the Strategic National Stockpile. We proved this summer during the outbreak in the Sun Belt that we now have the PPE, we now have the testing, we have the supplies to meet this moment, to make sure every American has a level of health care that we'd want any member of our family to have. But none of that would have been possible but for the fact that the President literally in one industry after another, in those early days, called businesses into the White House, sat them down around the table in the cabinet room, and said, what are you going to do to respond to this moment? Now, there were times that he used what's called the Defense Production Act. He used the authority that he has as President of the United States to direct firms to manufacture and create certain items and materials, swabs and the like. But I must tell you that I've been so inspired at the way that American free enterprise responded to this moment. Not only the sacrifice that businesses made, putting the health of their employees and their customers first during those 45 days to slow the spread, but the partnership that we saw this President forge with industries all across the country, and reinventing testing, seeing to the production and distribution of billions of supplies. And when we have that coronavirus vaccine before the end of the year, again, it's going to be a testament to American ingenuity and to the kind of public-private partnership that President Trump forged from the very beginning.
Got one of these masks. You can get them anywhere now. You can get them online, get them in the grocery store, get them at the pharmacy. It wasn't that way 6 months ago.
Right.
We didn't have masks. So when Joe Biden and the scientists say everybody wear a mask, everyone's able to wear a mask now because of the efforts of the Trump administration to make sure there's enough masks in America to wear. I can remember early on when Dr. Fauci and others said, don't wear a mask. And later when they're asked about it, they said, it's because we didn't have any masks. We needed to save them for the frontline personnel. Now you can get these almost anywhere. I want to ask you a question. The vaccine. You have Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and others saying, look, this vaccine, I'm not sure about its safety. I'm not sure I'm going to use it. Are you concerned that when they're talking like this, that it's going to cost people lives who should use a vaccine when the vaccine comes out?
Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and people like Governor Andrew Cuomo need to stop playing politics with people's lives by undermining confidence in a safe and effective coronavirus vaccine. You know, the President said this week, I mean, we have the greatest research companies in the world that are developing this vaccine. Now, the president has sped the process along through Operation Warp Speed, but we've cut no corners on safety. And we're not going to distribute a coronavirus vaccine until the FDA, independent board, independent evaluation all say that it's safe and effective for the American people. So to have Kamala Harris 3 times in a row refuse to say that she would take a vaccine that was produced under the Trump administration, in our own vice presidential debate to say that she wouldn't trust a vaccine from the president, to have the governor of New York this last week literally saying that he wouldn't trust the administration, is unconscionable. We're really talking about people's lives. And so, you know, all of this has got to stop. The American people can be very confident that while we've moved at record speed, that we will only go to the public with a vaccine that has been confirmed by the best scientists in the world as being safe and effective for the American people. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and other leading Democrats have to stop undermining public confidence in a vaccine.
You know, Mr. Vice President, many of the poor souls who passed away in nursing homes and assisted living facilities and so forth. Decisions made by governors like Cuomo and Murphy and Whitmer and Pritzker and Newsom and others, where they placed people with positive coronavirus tests into these homes with elderly people, frail people, upwards of 40% or so of the population, over 80,000 people by my last review of the CDC numbers. Did the president have a policy where people who are positive with the coronavirus should be placed with elderly or frail people?
You know, from very early in this pandemic, we realized that seniors, particularly those with serious underlying health conditions, were most vulnerable to serious outcomes with the coronavirus. It's one of the reasons why the president directed that the standards for infectious disease prevention were all raised in every nursing home in America. We have 8,000 inspectors we oversee that go and review nursing homes for compliance. We dedicated all of them to ensuring that infectious disease standards were being met. We focused on seniors from the very beginning, and we've never stopped, Mark. We know that they've been at risk. The CDC issued guidance for nursing homes to be able to safely operate, but to see some governors, like the governor of New York, literally return positive COVID patients to nursing homes, it breaks my heart to think of the lives that were lost. Particularly as we were surging resources into New York and New Jersey and New Orleans and Detroit during those difficult days of the pandemic in March and in April. I mean, literally, we sailed a ship into New York Harbor. We surged military medical personnel. We built overflow facilities in cities around the country. And really, there was no excuse for any public official returning seniors into a nursing home environment that hadn't been created to be safe and quarantined under CDC guidance. So, look, there'll be plenty of time for people to be held accountable for that. But I will tell you, from early in this pandemic, President Trump has put a specific focus on seniors and every single day. And I expect through the vaccine. Now, there'll be an independent board that determines who receives the vaccine first, but if history is a teacher, we would anticipate that seniors, particularly those that have underlying conditions, any American with an immunodeficiency, the most vulnerable will have the coronavirus vaccine first.
Yes or no? Has Joe Biden ever condemned Cuomo or these other governors or their policies for putting coronavirus positive patients in nursing homes, to your knowledge?
No.
So he's never condemned the governors, and he's never condemned the policy. I've never heard it either. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Mr. Vice President. The economy. So the economy took a big hit. And President, you've been working to rebound the economy and so forth. Joe Biden has a very different approach to the economy. Explain what it is that you want to do and what he wants to do.
When we came into office, in the 8 years that Joe Biden was vice president, America had experienced the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression. Not surprisingly, I was in Congress at the time, and the last administration tried to tax and spend and bail and regulate us back to a growing economy. When we came into office, President Trump said, look, we're going to cut taxes, we're going to roll back regulations, unleash American energy, fight for free and fair trade, and that's exactly what this president did. In our first 3 years, we cut taxes across the board for working families and businesses large and small. We rolled back more federal red tape than any administration in American history. We unleashed American energy, where now we're a net exporter of energy for the first time in 70 years. And President Trump fought for the kind of free and fair trade where we stood up to China. He said the era of economic surrender is over. And we renegotiated our trading relationship with Mexico and Canada in a way that puts American jobs and American workers first. The result of all of that in our first 3 years, 7 million jobs created, record unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans. I mean, literally, we saw wages rising across this country at the fastest pace in 10 years. And then when the coronavirus pandemic struck, and we lost 22 million jobs at the height of this pandemic, this president made it clear that we were going to spare no expense to get families and businesses large and small through this. We secured $4 trillion in aid. The Paycheck Protection Program, Mark, we think saved 50 million American jobs. The aid directly to families have helped Americans through this difficult time. And already, it's amazing to think, in the last 5 months, having lost 22 million jobs because of the foundation the president poured and because of the recovery, unprecedented recovery and relief efforts we secured from the Congress, 11.5 million Americans have already gone back to work, and the unemployment rate is now 7.8%. Now, we have a ways to go. It's one of the reasons why the president's reaching out to the Congress now and asking for more support for families and for businesses. But it's the other reason why this election is so important. I mean, President Trump and I are absolutely committed. We're going to distribute the vaccine. We're going to defeat the virus. We're going to cut taxes for families across the country again in the next 4 years. We're going to keep rolling back regulation, keep fighting for unleashing American energy. Joe Biden, by contrast, has said in the middle of a global pandemic, he wants to raise taxes by $4 trillion. He wants to return to a massive avalanche of regulation that'll stifle jobs, beginning with a $2 trillion version of the Green New Deal that would require the retrofitting of 4 million business buildings and 2 million homes. And then beyond that, on economic trade, Joe Biden had never lifted a finger. Democrats used to complain about NAFTA all the time. I remember those days. Never lifted a finger to do anything about it. But now we've got a strong new agreement, the USMCA. But Joe Biden wants us to take down all of the tariffs President Trump has imposed on China that are leveling the playing field and bringing China back to the table to open their markets to American goods and services and respect our intellectual property. And then lastly, on energy, which is a driver of our economy. Low-cost energy helps families, their utility rates in their homes. It helps businesses be able to grow. But it supports hundreds of thousands of energy jobs across the country. That Green New Deal and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's plan to abolish fossil fuels and ban fracking would literally crush our American energy renaissance. So this election is so important as our economy is just getting back on its feet. And I think the American people know that the right president at this time in the life of our nation, a president who's committed to all the policies that created 7 million jobs in our first 3 years, and a president that is going to continue to drive pro-growth policies versus Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. More taxes, more government, more regulation, less American energy. The choice is clear. We need 4 more years of President Trump in the White House to bring this economy all the way back and then some.
New study out of Stanford's Hoover Institute that says the Biden plan would cost 5 million blue-collar jobs.
Right.
It would destroy our energy independence. I mean, I remember we've been trying for 50 years to be energy independent. Now we finally are. You talk about fracking. It would drive parts of this country into a deep depression. Western Pennsylvania is a perfect example. Other parts of the country where we rely on oil and natural gas and so forth. Does it concern you when you look at Joe Biden's long career, 39 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president, he has never led the way for tax cuts, for opportunity zones, for deregulation. He's always been a big government guy. That's all he knows. So how would a guy that's a big government guy, that's all he knows, taxes, regulations, you talk about, how would he help pull this economy even further along? Wouldn't he crush it in the crib?
Well, there's no question in the history's 47 years in public life. Joe Biden has been advocating higher taxes, more government, less economic freedom. And again, I go back to, the last administration tried to borrow and spend and tax and bail our way back to a growing economy, and Joe Biden wants to go back to the same economic policies. You hear him talking about under his $2 trillion version of the Green New Deal. Whenever anybody brings up all the energy jobs that will be lost in their plan to abolish fossil fuels and ban fracking, he talks about green jobs. So you remember all those green jobs in the last administration.
Solyndra and all the other rip-offs.
The Solyndra boondoggle. The Green New Deal would be Solyndra on steroids. All of a sudden, you would have a whole new era of government subsidies for so-called green jobs and green energy. Look, the truth of the matter is today, our air and land are cleaner than any time in our history. Our water is among the cleanest in the world objectively. We've actually reduced greenhouse gases in this country because of energy innovation, because of the introduction of natural gas into our energy economy. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, no matter what they're saying now, Mark, they want to ban fracking and abolish fossil fuels and take us back down the boondoggle path of green new jobs. And we saw the weak economic recovery of the last 8 years. And the American people know for a robust American economy, for what President Trump says be the greatest economy in our history in 2021, we need to re-elect President Donald Trump.
When we come back, I want to ask you about race. I want to ask you about race, your administration, and Joe Biden's history. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mr. Vice President, race. You know, it amazes me how Joe Biden gets away with talking about race, racial equality. He's been around, as we talk about, 47 years. He talks about systemic racism. And I have to ask myself, well, what has he done about systemic racism in 47 years? Early in his career, he said some terribly horrible things, worked with segregationists. This administration's done many, many positive things. How do you, a stark contrast, I would argue.
I think it is a stark contrast. President Trump rightly says he's accomplished more in 47 months than Joe Biden has accomplished in 47 years. And I think that's especially true when it comes to African Americans in this country. Joe Biden's career got laid bare in his debates with Kamala Harris, the way he worked with segregationists and opposed busing back in the day. But I must tell you, I couldn't be more proud to be part of an administration that saw the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans. This president made funding for historically black colleges and universities permanent and at a record level. We worked with Senator Tim Scott. We've now created more than 8,000 opportunity zones in cities around the country with largely African-American populations that are attracting billions of dollars of investment. This president passed criminal justice reform after Joe Biden's record on the crime bill back in the 90s. This president stepped forward and worked with Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, and moved forward criminal justice reform in a way that no one had been able to accomplish for decades. And finally, this president has stood for the principle that every parent ought to be able to choose where their children go to school, regardless of their income and area code. And that's why it's really unconscionable that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to end school choice in this country. They want to shut down charter schools in America. I mean, the truth is our minority communities, African Americans, Hispanic Americans in our major cities are predominantly those who benefit from school choice. You know, the truth is Kamala Harris called out Joe Biden because he opposed busing. She said she was that little girl on a bus that wanted to go to a better school. Well, I would say to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, there are many young African American boys and girls that deserve to go to a better school, that are trapped as we speak in some of the most dangerous and failing schools in America, and their parents deserve to have a choice. And President Trump and I, with 4 more years, are going to continue to fight for parental choice in education. We're going to continue to support economic opportunities for African Americans. We're going to continue to support law enforcement in our communities, because every American of every race and creed and color deserves to live on a safe street. So with Joe Biden, it's all talk. 47 years of talk, paying lip service to their commitment to the African American community. With President Donald Trump, it's been results, one after another, that has contributed to economic opportunities, educational choice, historically black colleges and universities, a more just criminal justice system, and we're going to continue to build on that record for African Americans, all of our minorities, and every American for 4 more years.
Very briefly, Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor.
Right.
How did that look? You touched on it during the debate.
Well, when she ended up her career as the DA in San Francisco, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than Hispanics and whites in that community. When she was Attorney General, she talked about passing criminal justice reform. She never lifted a finger to do it. And the proportion of African Americans in the California prisons actually grew relative to the broader prison population when she was Attorney General. And when Tim Scott was working on police reform in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, he sat down with Republicans and Democrats. Kamala Harris literally got up and walked out of a meeting with Senator Tim Scott and refused to even consider or work with him on legislation to give more resources to law enforcement, more accountability, more training. And so the American people deserve to know Kamala Harris's record in California and on Capitol Hill.
When we come back, I want to ask you about law and order. I want to ask you about his summer riots and how the president reacted, your administration, and how Joe Biden reacted. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. You know, law enforcement's an area, again, of stark differences. There are really stark differences between the candidacy of Trump and Pence and Biden and Harris. And one of the areas is law enforcement. You have a record number of law enforcement organizations supporting you and endorsing your candidacy. And you have a record number of left-wing groups endorsing Joe Biden and his candidacy. We had a summer of horrific riots. We still see them in Portland. We still see them in other places where police officers are brutalized, where they're told to stand down, where citizens are brutalized, where homes are burned, where businesses are burned. What do you make of, again, a stark difference between the Trump and Biden positions on this?
From the first day of this administration, President Donald Trump has stood with the men and women of law enforcement at every level. And the endorsements that you see in law enforcement associations around the country is evidence of the fact that they know it and they appreciate it. They've got a president who's standing with them. But this summer, when we saw the horrific killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and let me be very clear, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd, and justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and the looting that followed. At the vice presidential debate, I brought as one of my guests Flora Westbrook, a wonderful African-American woman who 35 years ago started a little salon in Minneapolis. It really became a center of the community. And she told me in the days that followed the killing of George Floyd how how she saw the rioters and looters go closer and closer and closer to her business, and then the night that they just burned it to the ground. And this president has spoken out against that. We deployed the National Guard in our nation's capital. We supported the deployment of the National Guard that quieted the streets of Minneapolis quickly. We launched Operation Legend. But all summer long, all Joe Biden ever talked about was peaceful protesters, while literally businesses like Flores in cities around the country were burning to the ground. Now, Joe Biden was explaining all of it by saying that America is systemically racist and that police have an implicit bias against minorities. When Joe Biden was asked if he would cut funding to law enforcement, he said, yes, absolutely. Kamala Harris said we need to reimagine police, and she recently praised the mayor of Los Angeles' decision to cut $150 million from the LAPD. But President Trump and I have made it clear, we're going to stand with the men and women of law enforcement. We're not going to defund the police. We know that you don't have to choose between supporting law enforcement and supporting our African-American neighbors and friends and all the minorities and families that live in our cities. As I said earlier, we've done both. I'm proud of our record supporting African-Americans for jobs and education and law and order. But all along the way, this president has made it clear that we're going to stand with the men and women who stand on the thin blue line. I mean, Mark, my uncle was a police officer in Chicago for 25 years. I mean, I remember as a little boy with my 3 brothers going up to Chicago and seeing him coming out of his bedroom at my grandparents' house with that uniform on, the badge, sidearm, and we just look up at him in awe. I mean, all of my heroes wear uniforms. And President Trump feels just the same way, and that's why you see so many law enforcement organizations endorsing this president. And to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris literally undermining support for law enforcement, and speaking about cutting funding and reimagining and defunding the police. They're just doubling down on the policies that are contributing to violence in our cities. With 4 more years of President Donald Trump, we're going to support law enforcement, we're going to support our African-American neighbors, and we're going to have law and order in all of our cities for every American of every race and creed and color.
When we come back, I want to ask you about foreign policy. You're going to travel from China to Iran to other parts of the Middle East, to Israel. We'll be right back. Mr. Vice President, the President's been very engaged in foreign policy in significant ways that really are quite different than the past, from China, Iran deal, Israel, and so forth. I call it the Trump doctrine. The Trump doctrine's a pretty strong doctrine, isn't it?
Well, we call it America First.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after 8 years when Joe Biden was vice president, we had a president apologizing for America on the world stage. In President Donald Trump, we've had a president that's out championing America on the world stage and embracing his role as leader of the free world. You know, when we came into office, we inherited a mess on the foreign stage. ISIS had overrun an area the size of Pennsylvania. Russia was redrawing Europe by force. Syria had used chemical weapons on innocent civilians with no repercussions. North Korea was testing nuclear weapons and firing long-range missiles threatening the United States. And all along the way, China was taking advantage of America economically as they built up their military and their economic influence across the Asia Pacific. President Trump stepped into the breach, stood strong. As commander-in-chief, he directed the armed forces of our country. They destroyed the ISIS caliphate, took down their leader without one American casualty. He got us out of the Iran nuclear deal. Iran had gotten $1.8 billion when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States in cash. They were fomenting violence and terrorism all across the region. President Trump stood up to them, and earlier this year, he gave the order to take down an Iranian general responsible for the death of hundreds of American servicemen and women. And Qasem Soleimani is gone. We stood up to Russia. This president's been tougher on Russia than any president in my lifetime. Sanctions, expelling diplomats. And President Donald Trump, unlike when Joe Biden was vice president, President Trump made Javelin missiles available to Ukraine, tank buster missiles. When the last administration, the Obama-Biden administration, would only send blankets and MREs, military meals, to the Ukraine. We stood with Ukraine to defend their territorial integrity. And through 3 successive summits, now no more nuclear tests in North Korea, no more long-range missiles being fired, no more threats against the United States. And most meaningful to the President and me is I was there in Hawaii when 54 caskets were offloaded, the remains of Korean War heroes that finally came home. So all along the way, this President has stood strong. He's engaged the world. He's engaged leaders in the world. But he stood strong for America's interests and willing to use force, and America's safer as a result.
And Israel and the Middle East?
Well, with regard to Israel, I couldn't be more proud. You got to remember, the last 4 presidents promised the American people and the people of our most cherished ally that we'd recognize their capital. But it was President Donald Trump who moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state of Israel. He recognized the Golan Heights. And I would tell you, speaking to our friends in Israel, the President's strong stand against Iran, withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, taking out Qasem Soleimani, everyone believes has created the circumstances where for the first time in 26 years, 2 Arab nations recognize Israel's right to exist. I was watching a town hall that Joe Biden was in about a week or so back, and one of the questioners actually went through that litany, including the outbreak of peace between Arab nations and Israel, and asked if the President deserved any credit. And Joe Biden actually said yes, but then no. I said no, but the truth is, it is yes. President Trump has stood with our allies, he's stood up to our enemies, he's put America first, and America is stronger and Americans are safer as a result.
And he got numerous Nobel Peace Prize nominations to boot. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. What would your closing argument be to the American people to vote for the President and you?
President Donald Trump has literally kept every promise he made to the American people and seen our nation through the worst global pandemic in 100 years, where as we sit here today, we're literally weeks away from having a coronavirus vaccine and being able to put this pandemic in the past. But the President and I believe the best is yet to come. With 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House, we're going to distribute that vaccine. We're going to defeat the virus. And then we're going to revive this American economy bigger and better than ever before. Not with Joe Biden's plan of higher taxes, a Green New Deal, more regulation, but President Trump's going to cut middle-class taxes across the board. We're going to continue to roll back regulation. We're going to continue to support American energy independence. We're going to continue to stand strong on China, put America first, fight for free and fair trade that puts American jobs and American workers in the forefront of all of our considerations on trade. And all along the way, we're going to stand for all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution. 230 conservatives appointed to our federal courts, and very soon we'll have a 3rd justice on the Supreme Court of the United States when Justice Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed by the Senate, we believe, in just a matter of days. We're going to support law enforcement with more resources and more funding. We're going to end sanctuary cities, and we're just going to uphold all the ideals of this country. But this election is about choices, and the choice in this election has never been clearer. The stakes have never been higher. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want higher taxes, open borders, socialized medicine. They want to defund the police and take our nation on a path driven by the radical left, take us to a place America's never been before. And President Donald Trump, we made America great again in those first 3 years. We've seen America through these challenging days, but we're going to make America greater than ever before with 4 more years of President Donald Trump.
And you and the President have also said to Joe Biden, keep your hands off our Constitution, off our Supreme Court, and off our Senate. God bless you. Be safe on the campaign trail. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mark.
See you next time on Life, Liberty, and Levin.